You are listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So, if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
This is a bonus episode. There was never any informed consent, and there still is none. This piece and podcast has been inspired by the work of my friend Elizabeth Hart, who has campaigned for years on pet vaccines, childhood vaccines, and the fundamentals of informed consent. You can find her Substack at elizabethhart.substack and her website at vaccinationispolitical.net. A letter she shared with me that she sent to Professor Angus Dalgleish prompted me to write and record this piece. And folks, 25 years as an orthopedic surgeon, I know something about informed consent, and it's something that's still close to my heart, even though I'm not practicing as a surgeon anymore. I'm really driven by the fact that informed consent was absolutely trashed 5 years ago and continues to do so. So, my dear readers and listeners, what do I mean when I say there has never been any informed consent? Well, in this statement, there are two words, informed and consent. To give your consent, you need all the information. Not selected information, not curated narratives, not slogans and PR. You need every relevant fact, the benefits and the risks, the pros and the cons, the uncertainties, the alternatives, and the option to decline completely. And that decision being respected. Informed consent also means you have time to think, time to ask questions, and the freedom to choose without pressure, coercion, manipulation, punishment, or consequence. Your decision must be respected without judgment, without threats, and without any form of behavioral control. And this lack of informed consent applies to almost everything the government and the authorities do today. Whether it's the legislations they pass, the policies they promote, the programs they roll out, there is no informed consent. And if you just look at COVID and the so-called pandemic, we were never given true information, a real risk-benefit ratio, or the actual science behind any of the measures that were imposed on us. There was no honest data about lockdowns, certainly no acknowledgement of the harms of lockdowns, which were well known, by the way. No risk-benefit analysis comparing lives supposedly saved with the lives destroyed. The economy crushed, the businesses permanently shut down for no health benefit whatsoever. Or the fact that the mental health and education of an entire generation of children would be ruined. And that's just the beginning. There was no real science presented to justify masking, social distancing, mandates, or the genetic bioweapon that was the mRNA jab. There was, however, plenty of behavioral manipulation and nudge coercion, propaganda and fear porn. And fear is the mind killer, all designed to make us comply with their dictates. And we still do not have informed consent, as I keep saying. Just look at digital ID, look at central bank digital currencies, 15-minute cities, net zero, and the broader carbon and climate agenda. At no point have we been given clear, honest information about any of this. It is all wrapped up in slogans and sound bites manufactured by PR companies working for large corporations, philanthropists, billionaires, and the banking elite who have subverted our governments completely. And in truth, these governments have always served other masters, not the people. What about all the research to prove man-made climate change and the impending planetary death? Or the experts rolled out to lecture us on deadly pandemics? Well, as far as I'm concerned, academics are whores to the money men. They have sold their soul. And any remaining scientific integrity for the next research grant, paper publication, world tour, or book promotion. I have no interest in what these so-called experts have to say. So today, folks, I would argue that not only have we not been given informed consent, the authorities have never even attempted to obtain it. They do not want an informed public. They want compliance. And to do that, they need us to be kept in the dark. They need to keep us in ignorance. The most disappointing part of all of this is my former medical profession. And I'm proud to say former. As was highlighted in my conversation with the late lawyer Anna de Busserat before she passed away, there has never been any real teaching in medical schools about the legality and the process of obtaining true informed consent. You only need to look at what happened during COVID to see that. Take Professor Angus Dalgleish, for example. He wrote an article in the Daily Mail in 2021 promoting vaccine uptake among young people under his name. The title was, "What Every Young Person Who Fears the Jab Must," all in capital letters, be told. Vaccine expert Angus Dalgleish dismantled beliefs that have seen rates stall amongst the 18 to 30-year-olds. It was a complete disaster, if you ask me. He was presented as a vaccine expert. Yet, Gus is not a vaccine expert. His work is in cancers and cancer vaccines, and by the way, none of which have ever worked as far as I know, by the way. And he told me on the podcast, my podcast, that he did not know much about the childhood vaccines. So how could he be presented as an expert on vaccines? And he certainly wasn't an expert on COVID-19 injections in July 2021 because they'd been rushed out with no idea of the long-term consequences. Actually, let me just correct myself. If anything, by then the truth was already showing that they were harmful. And if you go back to early mRNA studies, it was all there to see. These were unsafe products. In fact, they had to have their name changed from a genetic intervention to vaccines just to get all of us to swallow it. Because remember, vaccines are that holy cow that can't be questioned. Vaccines are amazing, remember? And if you question vaccines, you must be a crazy person. So Gus was not, in fact, qualified to promote these genetic interventions. So why did he? Remember when people were told that you needed 2 doses to classify as being fully vaccinated? But then that changed. Then came along the boosters, then the regular boosters, then constant updating. It was all coercion, plain and simple. Shifting sands, shifting goalposts. Angus Dalgleish said openly, again on my podcast, that he wrote that piece for the Daily Mail under coercion, and the piece itself was coercive. Just think about that. Where is the outrage? Why is this not front page news? And it was coercion, all of it. The personal circumstances of young people were dismissed. It became a blanket instruction to submit to the injection. Ultimate peer pressure. Anyone who took the COVID-19 jab under the government and public health authorities' misinformation or under the pressure from the so-called experts did not give valid, voluntary, informed consent. If people accepted the injection so that they could travel or work or simply live a relatively normal life, that was not informed consent. And it wasn't just good old Gus. There were many others, including Asim Malhotra, Dr. John Campbell, the nurse, Robert Clancy in Australia, and a whole roster of celebrity doctors here and abroad and Hollywood celebrities. And what possessed them to take such an aggressive position promoting genetic products that they barely understood? That still has not been explained. What motivated them? Who tapped them on the shoulder? How much money was involved? And let me say this clearly. If you pushed the jab, and if even today you continue to promote the childhood vaccines, that should disqualify you from any so-called leadership role in this so-called freedom movement. You cannot lead a movement for truth and autonomy while still defending the very products and the systems that stripped people of their consent in the first place. You have no leg to stand on. And frankly, my dear listeners, you should not be listening to any of these people. No matter what truths they might be saying, the best lies are the ones coated in layers of truth. And now, after millions, if not billions of needles having been driven into arms, they turn around and say, oh, maybe there was a mistake. Well, it's too late. If doctors and vaccinators had challenged the authorities rather than collaborating with them to pressure, coerce, and manipulate people into these injections, the entire facade would have collapsed. But they did not. And that is the massive scandal that Elizabeth Hart and I have been shouting about now. The scandal that must be exposed. The truth is, the medical profession failed to protect the public from a mass population assault delivered via needles and their contents. They carried out the act, they pierced the skin, there was no valid consent for the COVID-19 injections. It is impossible to obtain valid consent from people who are under pressure, coercion, manipulation, or mandates. Never mind the fact that they were never told the true science or the true contents of the syringe. There was massive behavioral manipulation and propaganda, and that makes any so-called consent null and void. And we're seeing the same playbook again today, with digital ID, central bank digital currencies, the net zero agenda, Agenda 2030, the WEF goals, and the 15-minute cities, funding of Ukraine against the war against Russia, or supporting Israel in its genocide in Palestine. None of this has been properly discussed. None of us have been properly informed, yet all of us are being coerced into complying. This is a scandal, and people need to understand it, recognize it, and stand up and say no. The whole system is built on a house of cards. If we, the people at the bottom of this pyramid of control, simply withheld our consent, the entire structure would collapse. The truth is, we, the people, have always held the power. We hold up the system. But decades, if not centuries, of conditioning, propaganda, and cultural training have blinded us to that reality. We have been taught to obey, to comply, to trust authority without question, to fear standing out, to silence our instincts. And this conditioning has made us pliable and compliant, even though the only thing we ever needed to do was say no. Once people see through the programming, the spell breaks. It really is that simple. I highly recommend Meredith Miller's new book, Becoming Whole. She outlines how most of humanity is living under trauma. We are abused, and the abusers are manipulating us with intense psychological pressure and coercion. And if we need to break free and regain our sovereignty, we need to understand and recognize the patterns of abuse and the techniques used so that we can make ourselves immune to this. But we also need to ask the broader question, why is most of humanity suffering under this abuse, trauma bonded to the government and authorities and living in Stockholm Syndrome? And for that reason, I do again recommend her book, which is, in my opinion, a modern day masterpiece. And decades from now will be looked back as a reference point and hopefully the beginning of the Great Awakening. Many thanks for listening. Please share this with friends and family. Let's awaken as many people as possible. Much love, Doc Malik. I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and/or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.